D paid off. Her career in fashion design was booming, and she was about to buy herself a car that would symbolize everything she had achieved. As she entered the showroom, she immediately caught the attention of the sales staff. Some glanced at her outfit with a hint of disdain, while others exchanged looks of skepticism. She was used to this. It wasn't the first time her appearance had caused others to doubt her ability, yet Kiara had always carried herself with quiet confidence, undeterred by how others perceived her. Kiara approached the nearest sales desk, where a man, his name was Kevin, sat behind a sleek desk. He looked up at her with a raised eyebrow, his expression betraying the thoughts running through his mind. He quickly scanned her attire, his gaze flicking over her hoodie, her sneakers, and her unassuming look. "Can I help you?" he asked, his tone cold and distant. "Yes. I'm interested in the new Bentley Continental GT, Kiara said, her voice steady but her heart raced. She had her eye on this particular model for months. Kevin's eyes narrowed as if he hadn't heard her correctly. He leaned back in his chair, giving her another once-over. "That car's over $200,000, he replied, a smirk tugging at the corners of his lips. "You sure you're in the right place?" Kiara's smile faltered, but she didn't let her frustration show. This wasn't the first time she'd been judged based on how she looked. The way people underestimated her had been a recurring theme in her life, but this time she was not going to let them see her sweat. "I'm serious about buying," Kiara responded calmly, her voice unwavering. "Can you show me the car?" Kevin chuckled softly, almost mocking her. "I think you should come back another time, maybe dress a little more appropriately," he said, gesturing toward the more casual section of the dealership. "We don't usually deal with this kind of customer." Kiara could feel the heat rise in her chest, but she kept her composure. She wasn't about to let his words dictate how she felt, but she knew the system. She knew what he was insinuating. Her look didn't fit his idea of a proper customer, the kind that could afford to walk out with a luxury vehicle without batting an eye. She wasn't wearing a designer dress, wasn't sporting high-end accessories, but she had more than enough money to buy the car she wanted. Before she could respond, another customer walked into the showroom, a well-dressed couple, clearly affluent. Kevin's demeanor changed in an instant. His tone shifted to one of practiced politeness as he directed his attention entirely to them. Kiara stood there, invisible, as Kevin ignored her completely, eagerly attending to the new customers. It was all too familiar how people like her were dismissed simply because of their appearance. She wasn't some rich white woman in an expensive suit, and that, it seemed, was all that mattered to Kevin and others like him. "Excuse me," Kiara said, her voice cutting through the silence. "I'm interested in that Bentley." Kevin looked at her, his expression hardening. "That one's reserved for serious buyers. Maybe you should check the used cars." He didn't even try to hide his irritation. The words stung, but Kiara wasn't going to let him get away with it. She calmly replied, "I can pay in full today." Kevin's laugh echoed through the showroom. "Pay in full? You really think someone like you can afford that?" His words were loud enough for several others to hear, and a few customers turned to look. Kiara's face flushed, not from embarrassment, but from the rising anger inside her. "I assure you I can afford it," she said, her tone firm, eyes locked onto his, "and I will pay in full." His smirk only deepened, his condescension clear. "Well, let me know when you're ready to dress the part." He turned his back on her, dismissing her completely. Kiara stood there, her heart pounding, but she knew she wouldn't let it go. This wasn't just about the car anymore. It was about proving that she too had a right to be there, that her worth wasn't determined by her appearance, her skin color, or her clothes. She turned and walked out, but not before hearing Kevin's final words, not so softly muttered behind her, "Some people just don't know their place." As Kiara walked into the bright New York morning, the sting of the experience still fresh, she didn't let it break her. If anything, it fueled her determination. This wasn't over, and she would make sure Kevin and everyone else who had ever judged her knew exactly who she was and what she had achieved. Kiara's heart raced as she stepped out of the dealership, the morning air crisp against her skin, but her mind was ablaze with a simmering frustration. The sting of the treatment she had received still lingered, but it wasn't about the car anymore. No, it was about what she had been reminded of that day, how quickly people judge, how often they dismiss those who don't fit their narrow views of what success should look like. She had always been a fighter, always pushed back against the judgments and stereotypes that others tried to place on her, but today it felt different. The way Kevin had spoken to her, the disdain in his voice, had cut deeper than she expected. She had expected better from people in the high-end business world, but once again, her appearance, her skin, her clothes, had become the only things that mattered to them. It was infuriating, but also enlightening. How many others, just like her, walked into spaces like that every day, never able to show who they truly were, because the world judged them before they even had a chance. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about all the people who had been judged solely by their appearance, who had been denied opportunities simply because they didn't fit some idealistic image of what success should look like, and she wouldn't let it go. Not this time. As she walked down the sidewalk, the sound of her shoes clicking against the pavement, her phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, her heart fluttering slightly as she saw the name on the screen, her husband, Marcus. Marcus had always been her rock, the man who understood her struggles, her dreams, and her drive. The two of them had built their lives from nothing, and now they were both at the top of their respective fields. Marcus was a tech mogul, a visionary in renewable energy, and the man who had taught her that money wasn't the key to happiness. It was freedom. The freedom to do what you wanted when you wanted, with those you loved. And that's why, even though she had the financial means to live a lavish life, she preferred simplicity. She preferred being true to herself. She answered the phone, hearing his familiar voice on the other end. "Kiara," Marcus said, his voice warm. "What's going on? You sound a little off." She took a deep breath, trying to shake off the anger. "It's nothing, just another day of people underestimating me." There was a pause on the other end, and she could almost hear Marcus's wheels turning, the gears of his mind working to process what she was saying. "Tell me what happened," he finally said. "You know I don't like it when people disrespect you." Kiara smiled slightly, her anger subsiding just a bit at the thought of her husband's support. She recounted everything, the way Kevin had treated her at the dealership, the dismissive way he had spoken to her, and how his judgmental attitude made her feel like she didn't belong in that space. When she finished, there was silence for a moment before Marcus spoke again. "I'm sorry that happened, babe," he said, his voice low and steady. "But you know what? This is exactly why I love you. You don't let people's ignorance or their bias stop you. You rise above it. But don't forget, we have the power to make change." Kiara's mind raced as she absorbed his words. Change. She had been fighting for change in her own life, but now she realized there was a bigger battle to fight. It wasn't just about her anymore. It was about making sure that no one else had to endure the same thing, that no one else would be judged simply because they didn't fit into someone else's narrow box. "I've been thinking," Marcus continued, his voice now filled with determination. "What if we did something about this, not just let it slide? We have the resources, the platform, we can make a statement. We can make sure people understand that worth isn't determined by how you look or where you come from." Kiara felt a spark of excitement. "What are you thinking?" "I've got an idea," Marcus said, his voice brimming with confidence. "Tomorrow I want you to meet me at the dealership. I'll handle the rest. Let's show them that the way they treat people has consequences." Kiara's heart raced once more, but this time it was out of anticipation. Marcus's idea was bold, but she could feel that it was exactly what needed to be done. It wasn't about seeking revenge. It was about forcing people to open their eyes, to understand that value doesn't come from appearance or clothes. It comes from who you are as a person. The next morning, Kiara stood outside the dealership again, but this time she wasn't alone. Marcus had pulled some strings, and together they were about to turn the tables. As the sun gleamed on the luxury cars in the showroom, Kiara could feel a sense of empowerment coursing through her veins. She was no longer the woman who had walked in the day before, dismissed and ignored. Today she was a force to be reckoned with. Marcus, ever the visionary, had a plan that was not just about getting back at those who had wronged Kiara. It was about changing the way people viewed others, about teaching them a lesson in humility and respect. As they walked toward the entrance of the dealership, Kiara felt a surge of pride, not for herself, but for the message they were about to send. This wasn't about luxury cars or money. This was about challenging perceptions, about breaking down the walls that kept people from truly seeing others for who they really were. And as they stepped inside, Kiara knew without a doubt that this day would change everything. The morning sun bathed the streets of New York in a warm, golden glow, and Kiara couldn't shake the feeling that today was going to be different. Today wasn't just about proving herself, it was about making sure that Kevin and everyone else who had judged her would understand the power of their actions. She had never imagined this moment would come, but now as she stood outside the dealership with Marcus by her side, a calm sense of determination filled her. They were here to send a message. As they walked toward the dealership entrance, Kiara felt the weight of the situation. The tension between them and the glistening luxury cars was palpable, but the sense of purpose was even stronger. Marcus, always the strategist, had a plan. A plan that would force Kevin and the entire dealership to confront their biases, to recognize that people are not defined by their appearance. "Let's do this," Marcus said quietly, his voice filled with resolve. Kiara gave him a quick nod, knowing she was walking into something bigger than herself. As they stepped inside, the sound of the door chimes announced their presence. Kevin, the same sales manager who had dismissed her the day before, was standing by the desk. He looked up, his expression changing from indifference to surprise when he saw Kiara walk in, this time with Marcus at her side. The transformation in his demeanor was immediate. His eyes widened, and for a moment he froze. The man who had ridiculed her the day before now stood before her, realizing that the woman he had judged so harshly wasn't just anyone. She was someone with power, someone who didn't need to dress in a fancy suit to make a statement. But the most shocking part wasn't Kevin's reaction. It was the quiet confidence that Kiara exuded now, the way she stood tall and unshaken despite the way she had been treated earlier. There was a fire in her eyes, a steady determination that burned through any discomfort she might have felt. This was no longer about a car. It was about changing how people saw each other, about making sure no one would ever feel inferior simply because they didn't look the part. "Good morning, Kevin," Marcus said smoothly, his voice almost too polite, like he was savoring the moment. Kevin's face flushed slightly as he quickly adjusted his tie, trying to regain some semblance of control. "Good morning, sir. How can I help you today?" Marcus gave him a measured smile. "Actually, I'm here about the car my wife was interested in yesterday. The Azure Coupe, midnight blue." He gestured toward the car Kiara had been eyeing the day before. The look on Kevin's face was priceless. His eyes darted back and forth between Kiara and Marcus, and it was clear he was trying to process the situation. His earlier mockery, his condescension seemed so out of place now. He stammered for a moment, clearly caught off guard by Marcus's presence. "Of course, sir," Kevin said, forcing a smile, though the tension in his voice was unmistakable. "I'll be happy to assist you with that." As Marcus led the way to the car, Kiara stayed behind him, her eyes on Kevin. She watched as he scurried to open the door to the Azure, his earlier arrogance replaced by a desperate attempt to recover. It was almost comical the way he tried to please them now. But Kiara wasn't interested in his flattery. She was here for a bigger reason, one that had nothing to do with the car in front of her. "Tell me, Kevin," Marcus began, his tone still calm but laced with authority, "why did you treat my wife the way you did yesterday?" The question hung in the air, heavy and direct. Kevin, realizing that he couldn't dodge this, looked down, unable to meet Marcus's gaze. I... I didn't mean to, he stammered. It was just... It was just what? Marcus pressed. You assumed my wife didn't belong here because of her appearance. You assumed that because she wasn't dressed in a designer suit, she couldn't afford a luxury vehicle. Do you know how damaging that is? Kiara's heart pounded as she watched Kevin squirm. For the first time, he was on the defensive, and it felt good to watch him struggle to find an excuse. But it wasn't about revenge. It was about him learning the hard way that people like her didn't deserve to be treated like second-class citizens. She wasn't some poor soul who couldn't fit into his world. She had built her own empire, and now she was going to make sure people understood that it wasn't her appearance that mattered. It was her substance. I'm sorry, Kevin muttered, his voice barely audible. But Kiara wasn't done yet. You should be, she said, her voice firm, not a trace of malice in it, just the simple truth. You should be sorry for every person you've ever treated like this, for every person who wasn't given the respect they deserved because of how they looked. Marcus turned to Kiara, offering her a nod of approval. He had never been more proud of her. This wasn't just about changing Kevin's mind. It was about showing everyone in that room that people's worth wasn't something that could be judged by their appearance or the way they dressed. It was something far deeper, far more important. You know, Kevin, Marcus said, looking over at the car with a slight smile, I think we'll take the Azure, and I think you'll handle everything from here on out. Kevin nodded quickly, still visibly shaken. Of course, sir, he said, his voice tight with embarrassment. As Kiara and Marcus completed the purchase, the sales floor buzzed with whispered conversations. People had witnessed something rare that day. The tables had been turned. The woman who had been judged based on her clothes and her skin color had proven, without a doubt, that she was more than capable of standing in any room she chose. And as they left the dealership, Kiara felt a sense of satisfaction that wasn't about the car, but about what they had accomplished. Kevin, now humbled, stood there watching them go. He had learned a lesson the hard way. Kiara and Marcus hadn't just bought a car. They had shown everyone in that dealership what true power and respect looked like. It was a month later, and the city of New York was bustling with the energy of a new season. The crisp autumn air swept through the streets, signaling that change was in the air, just as it had been for Kevin. He walked through the dealership with a sense of quiet introspection, his usually confident steps now slow, measured, as if he was carrying a weight he hadn't expected. The events of the past month had left an indelible mark on him. What he had once dismissed as a small mistake now seemed like a profound lesson, one that had reshaped his view of the world and the people around him. The dealership was quieter than usual, and as Kevin passed the rows of luxury cars, his mind wandered back to that fateful day when Marcus and Kiara had walked in, showing him a side of life that he had never truly understood until now. He couldn't stop thinking about the way Kiara had stood her ground, the calm yet unshakable confidence she had exuded in the face of his arrogance. It was something that had haunted him for weeks. He had been so quick to judge, to dismiss her as just another customer who didn't belong in the world of high-end cars, and now he realized just how wrong he had been. It wasn't just about the Azure coupe or the money. It was about respect, dignity, and how easily people could be reduced to their appearances. He had failed to see the value in someone because they didn't fit his narrow, superficial view of success. And now he was paying the price for it, not just in lost sales, but in a lost sense of integrity. As Kevin made his way to the staff room, he could hear the hum of quiet conversation and laughter. His eyes caught a few familiar faces, but there was something different in the way people looked at him now. They didn't see the confident, untouchable sales manager they once knew. Now they saw someone who had been humbled, someone who had learned a lesson the hard way. It wasn't just the way the sales team interacted with him, but the way he saw them. He no longer viewed them as competitors or colleagues to be outdone. He now saw them as people with real lives and real struggles. It had taken a moment of personal reckoning to understand that. The phone on his desk buzzed, pulling him out of his thoughts. He picked it up. glancing at the screen. It was a reminder, the charity gala. He had promised Marcus he would show up and volunteer. The event was just days away, and he knew this was his chance to make things right. He couldn't undo the past, but he could at least make an effort to show that he was willing to change. The idea of working at the gala alongside the very people he had once looked down on still felt uncomfortable, but it was part of the process of learning to see beyond appearances, to see people for who they truly were. As much as he hated to admit it, he owed it to Marcus, to Kiara, and to himself to take that first step. The night of the gala arrived, and Kevin stood at the entrance of the Boston Hotel dressed in the event staff uniform. The grand hall was transformed into a dazzling display of lights, with guests mingling and enjoying the evening. The sound of laughter and music filled the air, but Kevin could feel the weight of the moment. This wasn't just another fancy event. This was where he was going to confront his past actions and make amends. As he stood by the door, directing guests to their seats, he couldn't help but notice how different everything seemed. The people at this event weren't here for the flashy cars or the expensive suits. They were here for a cause, for something much bigger than themselves. And that was something Kevin had never truly understood before. The value of a person wasn't determined by the brand on their clothes or the size of their paycheck. It was determined by their character, their heart, and what they contributed to the world. He looked around the room, his gaze falling on a young boy in a wheelchair, smiling as he interacted with the volunteers. Kevin's thoughts shifted again. He had seen this boy a few times over the past few weeks during his training at the foundation. At first, he had been uncomfortable, unfamiliar with the world of disability and the resilience that came with it. But now, he understood. The boy wasn't defined by his condition. He was defined by his strength, his will, and his unshakable joy. It was a lesson Kevin couldn't ignore. The evening wore on, and as the guests enjoyed dinner and speeches, Kevin found himself in conversation with some of the families. They shared stories of their struggles, their triumphs, and the impact the Collins Foundation had on their lives. It was impossible not to be moved by their words, by the raw emotion and the sheer will to persevere in the face of adversity. Kevin couldn't help but feel a deep sense of humility wash over him. Then, towards the end of the night, Kiara and Marcus approached him. Kiara was radiant, her smile warm and welcoming, as always. Marcus gave him a brief nod, but it was Kiara who spoke first. "How are you doing, Kevin?" she asked, her tone kind but knowing. Kevin hesitated, unsure of how to respond. He knew there was no excuse for his past actions, but he also knew that his journey towards change had just begun. I'm trying," Kevin said, his voice sincere. "I'm trying to learn. I've realized that the things I once valued don't matter as much as I thought they did." Kiara's smile softened, and she placed a hand on his shoulder. "It's a start, Kevin," she said gently. "You've taken the first step." Marcus nodded in agreement. "It's never easy to admit when we're wrong, but it's how we grow. Keep learning." Kevin's eyes met theirs, and for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was on the right path. The weight of his mistakes still lingered, but he knew he had the chance to do better, and that, he realized, was all anyone could ask for. As the night came to a close, Kevin watched Kiara and Marcus mingle with the other guests, their warmth and authenticity shining through. They weren't here to show off their wealth or their status. They were here to make a difference, and that, Kevin thought, was the true meaning of success. The weeks that followed the gala had left Kevin with a sense of transformation that he hadn't expected. It wasn't just about the public apology or the lesson in humility. It was about a deep internal shift. For the first time in years, he wasn't just looking at people through the lens of success or status. He was seeing them as individuals, unique, worthy of respect, no matter what they wore, how they looked, or where they came from. But as much as Kevin had changed, the world around him hadn't. He still walked the same showroom floor, interacted with the same clients, and dealt with the same pressures of hitting sales targets. The only difference was that now, when he looked at the people in front of him, he saw beyond the surface. He saw their stories, their struggles, their humanity. It wasn't always easy. There were still moments when he slipped into his old mindset, when the pressure to meet quotas and close deals made him feel like he had to judge people based on their appearance. But now, there was something inside him that pushed back against that impulse. He couldn't ignore it. Every time he caught himself making a snap judgment, he would remember the faces at the gala, the families who had fought for their children, the volunteers who had given their time and effort without expecting anything in return, and, most importantly, Kiara. Kiara had become more than just a symbol of resilience for him. She had become a catalyst for change. Her quiet strength, her ability to rise above the biases that had been thrust upon her, had ignited something in him. And now, as he stood in the dealership one afternoon, helping a client with a purchase, he realized just how far he had come. It was then that Marcus walked in. Marcus greeted him with a smile, his presence as calm and powerful as ever. "I was hoping to see you today." Kevin stood up straight, feeling a swell of respect for Marcus. The man hadn't just taught him about business, he had taught him about life, about people, about what really mattered. "I'm glad you stopped by," Kevin said, offering a genuine smile. "I've been meaning to thank you, for everything." Marcus raised an eyebrow, a playful smile tugging at his lips. "I think you're doing just fine on your own, but I'm glad to see you've made some progress. How's the sales floor been treating you?" Kevin's smile softened. "It's been different. I've been seeing things differently, more clearly, and honestly, I think the clients are noticing it too. They feel more at ease, more respected. It's a small change, but I think it's making a difference." Marcus nodded, pleased. "That's the thing about respect. It's contagious. When you give it to others, they're more likely to give it back, and that's where the real connections happen." Kevin couldn't help but agree. He had seen it firsthand. The clients who had once felt uncomfortable or judged now seemed more open, more willing to engage. The dealership's environment had shifted. Less tense, less transactional. People came in to buy cars, but they left with a sense of being seen, heard, and valued. As they spoke, a young woman approached Kevin's desk. She looked a little out of place, dressed casually in jeans and a t-shirt, her hands nervously clutching her purse. Kevin recognized the look, the same one he had seen in Kiara all those weeks ago, the look of someone who was about to be dismissed, to be judged before they even had the chance to speak. Kevin stood up, smiling warmly at her. "Hi there," he said. "What can I help you with today?" The woman seemed surprised by his tone, taken aback by the genuine kindness in his voice. She hesitated for a moment before answering, "I'm looking for a car, something affordable but nice. I've saved up for a while and I want to make sure I get it right." Kevin nodded, his mind instantly shifting to what mattered most, helping her find the right car, not just making a sale. "Of course, we've got plenty of options. Let me show you a few. We'll take our time to find something that feels just right." As they walked toward the showroom floor, Kevin realized something important. He wasn't just there to sell cars anymore. He was there to serve people, to make them feel like they mattered. He had learned from Marcus, from Kiara, that real success wasn't about closing the deal or reaching the next target. It was about connecting with people, understanding their needs, and treating them with the respect they deserved. The woman's face softened as they spoke, and by the end of the conversation she had found the perfect car for her. She thanked Kevin repeatedly, her eyes sparkling with gratitude. As she left the dealership, Kevin watched her go, feeling a sense of fulfillment he hadn't experienced before. This wasn't just a sale. It was a reminder that when you treat people with kindness and respect, you create a ripple effect. It wasn't about the car, though the sale was important. It was about the experience, the connection, and the trust that had been built. As the woman drove off in her new car, Kevin stood by the door for a moment, reflecting on how far he had come. He remembered the day he had judged Kiara, and he remembered the lesson that had changed everything. He knew he wasn't perfect. He still had moments where he slipped, where he struggled with his old habits. But he also knew that change was a process, and that every step forward, no matter how small, was worth celebrating. And as he walked back to his desk, his heart lighter than it had been in a long time, Kevin realized that this was only the beginning. There was still so much more to learn, to experience, and to give. But for the first time in a long time, he felt like he was finally on the right path. As the story comes to a close, Kevin stands at a pivotal moment in his life. From the arrogant salesman who judged based on appearances to the man who now truly understands the value of respect, kindness, and the power of looking beyond the surface, his journey has been nothing short of transformative. What started as a simple mistake, judging someone based on their appearance, became a life-changing lesson that reshaped his perception of others and himself. The lesson he learned wasn't about the car sales or the financial success. It was about human connection. It was about treating people with dignity, no matter where they come from, how they dress, or the color of their skin. For Kevin, the road to change wasn't easy, but it was worth it. Every step forward, no matter how small, was a victory. Through Marcus and Kiera, he learned that true success doesn't come from closing a deal, it comes from building meaningful relationships, from showing respect to others, and from making a positive impact in the world. This story isn't just about Kevin, it's about all of us. We've all been in situations where we've made assumptions about others based on their appearance or background. But what if we stopped for a moment and really saw the person in front of us? What if we took the time to listen, to understand, and to respect their journey? Imagine the change we could create in our communities, in our workplaces, and in our lives. The true measure of wealth isn't about money or possessions. It's about how we treat others, how we uplift those around us, and how we make the world a better place. The lesson from this story is clear. Always look beyond appearances and see the person, the human being in front of you. If you enjoyed this video and the message it carries, please comment 1 below. If you think there's room for improvement, feel free to comment 0 so I can make the content even more engaging. Thank you for watching, and let's continue to learn, grow, and build a world where respect and kindness are the foundation of everything we do.